What if the oldest civilization on Earth wasn't supposed to exist at all? Hidden beneath the soil of Turkey are stone monuments older than writing, older than cities, and older than agriculture itself. Built by unknown hands with precision that defies its age, these structures force historians to ask a disturbing question. Have we misunderstood the true beginning of civilization? These silent monuments compel us to rethink the origins of civilization itself. They hint at a forgotten chapter of human history, one where planning, symbolism, and engineering emerged far earlier than we ever imagined. And they leave us with an unsettling question. What if the roots of human knowledge stretch far deeper into the past than our history books are willing to admit? Mount Nemrut. High above the plains of southeastern Turkey, rising more than 2,000 meters into thin mountain air, stands Mount Nemrut, a place that seems intentionally removed from ordinary human life. Here, on a wind-scoured summit where survival itself is a challenge, ancient builders constructed a monument that still resists simple explanation. This is not a city, it is not a fortress, and it was never meant to accommodate crowds. Instead, the summit of Nemrut Dağ was transformed into a colossal artificial mound of stone, encircled by monumental seated statues of gods, mythic figures, and a king who placed himself among them. What unsettles modern researchers is not only the audacity of constructing such a complex in one of the most inhospitable locations imaginable, but the realization that every element, every statue, every alignment, every terrace appears to follow a deeper symbolic logic. A logic that does not originate solely on Earth, but reaches toward the sky. The scattered stone heads that now lie across the summit form one of the most haunting images in the ancient world. Once seated atop towering bodies, the colossal faces of gods and king now rest on the ground, separated with striking consistency. This uniform pattern has led many scholars to doubt that simple natural collapse alone can explain their condition. While earthquakes likely played a role over centuries, some researchers have suggested ritualized defacement or deliberate symbolic destruction during later periods of political or religious upheaval. What is certain is that these statues represent no single tradition. Instead, they embody a calculated fusion of Greek, Persian, and indigenous Anatolian deities. Zeus aligned with Oromasdes, Apollo with Mithras, and Hercules with Artagnus. This deliberate synthesis reveals that Nemrut was not merely a place of worship, but a bold ideological statement. Here, political authority was deliberately intertwined with divine order, presenting kingship as something cosmically ordained. At the center of this vision stands Antiochus I of Commagene, the ruler responsible for the monument. Surviving inscriptions reveal that he did not consider himself merely a mortal king. He claimed divine ancestry and portrayed himself as an intermediary between heaven and earth, a figure whose authority was sanctioned by the gods themselves. One of the most compelling features of Mount Nemrut is the precise orientation of its ceremonial terraces. The eastern and western platforms were not placed arbitrarily. They were carefully positioned to interact with the movement of the sun. At dawn, the rising light illuminates the eastern statues directly, bringing the faces of gods and king into brilliance. At sunset, the western terrace absorbs the fading light, casting long shadows that mark the transition from day to night. This deliberate choreography of light and shadow strongly suggests ritual intention. Nemrut was not meant to be passively observed. It was designed to be activated by the sky itself, by time, by celestial cycles, and by the movement of the sun across the horizon. Achieving such precision at an elevation exceeding 2,000 meters in rugged terrain and with the limited technology of the Hellenistic world would have required sustained astronomical observation and a deep understanding of solar movement. This sharply weakens any argument for coincidence and strengthens the view that Mount Nemrut functioned as a cosmological monument, a structure bound to time, ritual, and celestial order. When examined through this lens, Nemrut cannot be separated from the ancient worldview in which astronomy, religion, and political power were inseparable. Antiochus's inscriptions emphasize not death, but continuity, his eternal presence within the cosmic order. From this perspective, the mountain becomes a stage upon which the king's identity was permanently synchronized with the movement of the heavens. This interpretation gains further weight from one unsettling fact. No confirmed burial chamber or human remains have ever been found at Mount Nemrut. If this was a tomb, it is one without a body. This absence suggests that physical burial may never have been the monument's purpose. Instead, Nemrut appears to have been conceived as a mechanism of symbolic immortality, where the king was not laid to rest, but inscribed into the eternal rhythm of the cosmos. Here, the boundary between tomb, temple, and astronomical observatory dissolves. The monument becomes something far more abstract, a declaration that royal authority itself was aligned with the universe, that the king's existence continued through time, light, and celestial motion rather than through flesh and bone. The isolation of Mount Nemrut reinforces this interpretation. Far from population centers, inaccessible to ordinary daily life, the site seems directed not towards subjects, but toward the gods, the sky, and eternity itself. It was not built to be lived in, nor even frequently visited, but to endure, to observe, and to communicate meaning beyond human lifespans. It is this extraordinary convergence of architecture, religion, astronomy, and political ambition that transforms Mount Nemrut into one of the most profound enigmas of the ancient world, a place where every stone, every alignment, and every ray of sunrise may carry significance far deeper than what the human eye alone can perceive. Derinkuyu is not merely a forgotten structure buried beneath the soil of Cappadocia. It is a statement carved into the earth itself. Hidden more than 60 meters below the surface and descending through at least 18 carefully engineered levels, this was never a simple refuge or an improvised hiding place. Derinkuyu was a fully developed underground city capable of sustaining thousands of people for extended periods of isolation. Ventilation shafts reaching the surface, deep water wells, food storage chambers, communal spaces, and massive rolling stone doors capable of sealing entire levels from within all point to deliberate planning and long-term survival strategy. Those who expanded and used this city clearly believed that life above ground could, at times, become dangerously unsafe. And that leads to the most unsettling question, not how Derinkuyu was built, but why human communities felt compelled to disappear beneath the earth in the first place. No written source clearly records the original construction of Derinkuyu. What remains instead is architecture, engineering, and inference. Most scholars agree that the earliest deep levels were likely initiated by the Phrygians around the first millennium BCE, carved into Cappadocia's soft volcanic tuff. Over centuries, the complex was expanded and adapted by successive cultures, including Persian, Roman, and Byzantine communities, each modifying the city to meet new threats and needs. Yet this explanation only tells us who used Derinkuyu, not what originally justified such an extraordinary undertaking. Excavating tens of meters underground, maintaining structural stability, designing ventilation capable of supplying fresh air to deep levels, and ensuring reliable access to water required immense labor, technical understanding, and long-term coordination across generations. This was not the work of a small group responding to a short-lived danger. Such an investment suggests fear that was persistent, recurring, and severe. Warfare and persecution are often cited as the primary motivations. During the Byzantine period, Derinkuyu almost certainly served as refuge during periods of invasion, particularly in times of Arab-Byzantine conflict. The city's narrow corridors, defensible choke points, and enormous circular stone doors, each weighing several tons, were clearly designed to slow or stop intruders while allowing inhabitants to seal themselves off completely. Yet even prolonged warfare does not fully explain the scale of the city. Temporary danger does not require a settlement capable of supporting entire populations underground for months at a time, generation after generation. This has led some researchers to consider environmental stress as a contributing factor. Long-term climatic instability, drought, or regional hardship may have made surface life unreliable, encouraging communities to develop underground alternatives as insurance against uncertainty. However, geological evidence has not yet identified a single catastrophic environmental event that would explain Derinkuyu's sustained use over centuries. What makes Derinkuyu even more enigmatic is that it was not isolated. Long tunnels connect it to multiple underground cities across Cappadocia, forming a vast subterranean network rather than a single defensive response. This suggests regional planning and shared knowledge, not isolated panic. Unlike pyramids, palaces, or surface temples meant to project power or divine authority, Derinkuyu displays no interest in grandeur. Its architecture is functional, concealed, and ruthlessly practical. Everything about it prioritizes survival over symbolism. Those who lived here willingly surrendered sunlight, open space, and daily contact with the natural world in exchange for security. This choice implies a worldview shaped by recurring danger, one in which the surface could never be fully trusted. When Derinkuyu was finally abandoned and sealed, it preserved these unanswered questions in silence. It stands as a reminder that human history is not only a story of progress and expansion, but also of retreat, preparation, and adaptation to fear. Derinkuyu forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable possibility, that there were moments in our past when survival did not mean building upward toward the sky, but descending into darkness and staying there for as long as necessary. Ephesus is far more than another ruined city lining the shores of the Mediterranean. It is a place that quietly unsettles our assumptions about the intellectual limits of the ancient world. Beneath its collapsed colonnades and time-worn marble streets lies the imprint of a city conceived not as a loose accumulation of buildings, but as a coherent and regulated system, engineered, administered, and organized with a clarity that feels strikingly ahead of its era. Everywhere in Ephesus, intention is visible. Streets were aligned with clear purpose. Infrastructure was concealed beneath the surface rather than imposed upon it. Urban zones were arranged according to function and logic, not convenience or chance. Together, these features suggest something deeply unsettling. Ephesus was not constructed in the improvisational manner we typically associate with ancient cities. Its urban form speaks not of gradual trial and error, but of foresight, not of organic growth alone, but of deliberate planning. This raises a difficult question that continues to trouble historians and archaeologists alike. How did a civilization we classify as ancient think with such precision, such systemization, and such a seemingly modern understanding of the city as a living mechanism? Ephesus did not develop randomly or haphazardly over centuries. Instead, it emerged as a carefully calculated whole in which every major street, functional district, and public structure fit into a tightly controlled spatial framework. This suggests long-term vision and centralized planning rather than unchecked expansion shaped solely by population growth or economic pressure.
One of the clearest demonstrations of this advanced thinking lies beneath the city itself. The street and sewer systems of Ephesus stand as some of the most sophisticated examples of urban engineering in the ancient world. Main roads were not only paved with durable stone, but engineered with precisely calculated gradients, allowing rainwater and waste to flow naturally into underground channels. Hidden from view was an extensive drainage and sewage network constructed as a unified system from the outset, with a clear separation between fresh water and waste. This principle of urban hygiene would not be widely understood or consistently implemented again until many centuries later. Crucially, these streets did not function in isolation. They formed the structural backbone of the city, linking administrative centers, marketplaces, bath complexes, theaters, religious precincts, and residential neighborhoods according to a coherent logic. Ephesus was not designed merely to allow movement. It was designed to organize life. Its infrastructure shaped how people interacted, how commerce flowed, how public space was experienced, and how social order was maintained. In this sense, the city functioned as an integrated operating system rather than a collection of monumental structures. Perhaps the most revealing evidence of this advanced urban mindset appears in the city's approach to hygiene and public health. Ephesus's public latrines were not crude add-ons or temporary solutions. They were permanently integrated into the water supply and sewer network. Stone seating was installed above continuously flowing water channels, ensuring waste removal and cleanliness. This reflects not only technical ingenuity, but a clear understanding of the relationship between sanitation, environment, and human well-being.
The planners of Ephesus did not focus solely on grandeur or spectacle. They paid close attention to the conditions of everyday life. Residential areas were not mixed indiscriminately with workshops or commercial zones. Instead, districts were organized according to social status and function, revealing a society with a strong sense of order, control, and administrative authority. Such spatial discipline implies governance powerful enough to enforce planning regulations over long periods of time. Public buildings further reinforce this impression. The Library of Celsus, the Agora, the Great Theater, bath complexes, and temples were not scattered arbitrarily across the cityscape. They were positioned with careful consideration for accessibility, circulation, natural light, and ventilation. This arrangement suggests an advanced understanding of how humans move through and experience urban space. Ephesus was shaped as a carefully managed environment, not merely a stage for monumental display. What continues to unsettle researchers is whether this planning system evolved slowly through generations of experimentation, or whether it was based on a pre-existing and standardized body of knowledge, possibly inherited from earlier urban traditions whose traces have largely disappeared from the historical record. The remarkable consistency of the city's layout over time suggests not only technical expertise, but a strong administrative structure capable of preserving planning principles despite demographic change and economic pressure. Even at the height of its prosperity, Ephesus maintained its core urban coherence. It avoided the chaotic, unregulated sprawl that characterized many ancient cities. When compared to its contemporaries, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. While most ancient urban centers grew in fragmented and improvised ways, Ephesus possessed paved roads with calculated slopes, a comprehensive sewer system, and clearly defined functional zones. This level of systemic sophistication makes Ephesus appear less like a typical product of its time and more like an anomaly, an exception that resists easy explanation. For this reason, Ephesus confronts history with an uncomfortable question. Have we underestimated the capacity for long-term, systemic thinking in ancient civilizations? Or is Ephesus the surviving fragment of a peak of knowledge that was never fully preserved or transmitted? The city's eventual decline only deepens this mystery. Despite its intelligent planning,
Ephesus could not prevent the silting of its harbor or the environmental transformations that slowly undermined its economic lifelines. Did its builders understand urban organization in extraordinary depth, yet remain powerless against large-scale natural change? Or did the collapse of administrative systems cause this advanced planning knowledge to be lost? Ephesus, therefore, is not merely a landscape of ruins and fallen columns. It is a living challenge to our understanding of the ancient past, a reminder that earlier civilizations may have been far more complex, disciplined, and intellectually advanced than we are comfortable admitting. And that is precisely why Ephesus remains one of the greatest urban mysteries of the ancient world.
Çayönü. Long before kings ruled cities or writing fixed human memory into clay and stone, there was Çayönü. Not a temporary camp, not a crude experiment, but a deliberately organized community whose level of planning challenges long-standing assumptions about early human society. For centuries, its inhabitants built, cultivated crops, managed animals, and reshaped their environment with a degree of structure that feels strikingly modern for such a distant age. Then, without violence, without visible catastrophe, and without clear explanation, they left. No widespread destruction, no burned horizons, only silence settling over southeastern Anatolia, nearly 10,000 years before the Common Era. Çayönü marks one of humanity's earliest steps toward permanent settlement and one of its most unsettling disappearances. This was not simply an ancient site, it is a question that refuses to fade. Why would a society so organized, so stable, choose to abandon everything it had built? Archaeology makes one fact unmistakably clear. Çayönü was not random or chaotic. Its layers reveal a remarkably ordered process of development unfolding across generations. Architecture progressed through clearly defined phases, from early round and sub-rectangular dwellings to carefully planned stone structures laid out with increasing precision. This was not trial and error, but accumulated knowledge passed forward through time. At the same time, tools became increasingly specialized. Evidence of early plant cultivation and animal management appears alongside architectural advances, suggesting coordinated shifts in economy and daily life. Even more striking is the early use of native copper, hammered rather than smelted, indicating technological awareness long before formal metallurgy emerged. Çayönü directly challenges the assumption that early Neolithic communities were loosely organized or intellectually simple. Instead, the settlement reveals shared rules, collective spaces, and deeply embedded symbolic practices. Its layout reflects intentional planning rather than organic sprawl, implying social coordination well beyond basic survival. Most revealing is the so-called skull building, where human skulls were deliberately separated, modified, and arranged. This was not random behavior, but structured ritual practice. It points to early concepts of memory, authority, and possibly hierarchy, evidence that abstract belief systems and social power were already shaping human life far earlier than once believed. What makes Çayönü truly mysterious, however, is not how it emerged, but how it ended. After centuries of continuity, the settlement was completely abandoned. There are no signs of large-scale warfare, no thick destruction layers, no mass graves or abrupt collapse. Unlike many ancient sites, Çayönü does not end in fire or blood. This silence has made its abandonment one of the most debated questions in prehistoric archaeology. One hypothesis suggests gradual climatic change. Subtle shifts in rainfall, vegetation, or seasonal patterns may have weakened agricultural stability over time. Yet regional paleoclimate data does not point to a sudden or extreme environmental collapse at the precise moment Çayönü was deserted. Another theory focuses on resource pressure.
As population density increased and farming intensified, surrounding soils may have degraded, forests may have been overused, and grazing land may have declined. These cumulative stresses could have slowly undermined sustainability. Still, this explanation does not fully account for total abandonment rather than adaptation or relocation nearby. A more compelling interpretation considers social transformation rather than crisis. Ritual practices and symbolic spaces were central to Çayönü's identity. If belief systems evolved, fractured, or lost authority, the settlement itself may have ceased to function as a unifying center. What once held the community together may have become restrictive rather than stabilizing. It is also possible that Çayönü fulfilled a specific historical role, a transitional place where humans experimented with permanent settlement, agriculture, ritual authority, and collective governance. Once these models were internalized, the site itself may no longer have been necessary. In this view, abandonment was not failure, but movement forward. The people did not disappear. They carried their knowledge, traditions, and social structures elsewhere, shaping the next chapters of human history. The mystery of Çayönü is therefore not simply about an empty settlement. It challenges the idea that civilization advances in a straight line from simple to complex, from chaos to order. Çayönü reveals that early humans were capable of remarkable sophistication and equally capable of leaving it behind without collapse or catastrophe. It is this quiet ending that makes Çayönü one of the deepest enigmas of prehistory, a place where the most haunting question is not how they built, but why they chose to leave.
Göbekli Tepe. Long before cities existed, long before agriculture reshaped human life, and long before humanity was believed to possess the capacity for complex organization, something extraordinary rose from stone. On a quiet man-made hill in southeastern Anatolia stands Göbekli Tepe, a site so ancient and so precisely constructed that its very existence disrupts nearly everything we once believed about the origins of civilization. Dating to approximately 11,500 to 12,000 years ago, Göbekli Tepe was built during a period when humans were traditionally thought to live as small, mobile hunter-gatherer groups. According to long-standing assumptions, these societies lacked metal tools, wheeled transport, written language, domesticated animals, and permanent settlements. And yet standing before us is a monumental stone complex of astonishing scale, deliberate planning, and refined execution. Göbekli Tepe does not simply add an early chapter to human history. It forces us to confront the possibility that the story itself has been told in the wrong order. How could a society without metal, without agriculture, and without formal cities design and construct a monument of such precision and symbolic depth? At the heart of Göbekli Tepe are circular and oval stone enclosures arranged in a highly ordered pattern. Within each enclosure, massive stone pillars are positioned with remarkable consistency, with two dominant pillars standing at the center, forming the symbolic and spatial axis of the structure. These central pillars are not decorative supports, they define the enclosure itself. Each pillar is carved from a single block of limestone, shaped into a distinctive T form, standing between 4 and 6 meters tall and weighing 10 to over 20 tons. What astonishes archaeologists is not merely their size, but the extraordinary uniformity of their proportions, shapes, and craftsmanship across the site. Surfaces were carefully smoothed, edges precisely defined, and dimensions repeated with remarkable consistency. Such precision does not emerge from improvisation or instinct alone. It indicates that architectural standards existed before construction began, standards that were understood, shared, and rigorously applied. Göbekli Tepe is therefore not a crude arrangement of standing stones, but the product of geometric thinking, spatial planning, and technical skill far exceeding what hunter-gatherer societies were long assumed to possess.
One of the greatest unresolved questions surrounding Göbekli Tepe is how its builders extracted, transported, and erected these massive stone blocks. At the time of construction, humans had no draft animals, no wheels, and no metal tools. Yet they were able to quarry limestone with remarkable accuracy, detach monolithic blocks weighing tens of tons, and move them across distances of hundreds of meters, sometimes close to a kilometer. More remarkable still is that these pillars were not simply moved, but raised upright and positioned with precision within a carefully ordered geometric layout. This process would have required coordinated labor, shared technical knowledge, an understanding of leverage and balance, and a social structure capable of sustaining large-scale collective effort over extended periods. These demands suggest organizational capacities far beyond traditional models of early human society.
The spatial layout of Göbekli Tepe reinforces this conclusion. The stone enclosures do not overlap randomly or grow chaotically. Instead, they follow clear spatial relationships, maintaining consistent orientations and proportional spacing. This repetition strongly suggests that the builders were capable of visualizing the site as a whole rather than constructing it piecemeal over generations. Some researchers have proposed that this spatial organization reflects early geometric principles and possibly even connections to natural cycles or celestial observations. While definitive conclusions remain elusive, Göbekli Tepe unmistakably demonstrates a level of spatial awareness and planning previously thought impossible for societies of this age. The symbolic dimension of the site is equally striking. The two central pillars within each enclosure are consistently larger and more elaborately carved than the surrounding stones. Relief carvings depict arms, hands, belts, and loincloths, strongly suggesting that these pillars represent stylized human or humanoid figures. They are not structural necessities, but symbolic presences. This implies that architecture at Göbekli Tepe was inseparable from belief. Form and meaning were fused. The site was not merely functional, it was ceremonial, ritualistic, and deeply symbolic. It reflects a worldview in which monumental architecture served as a bridge between the human community and forces perceived as sacred or transcendent. The enduring stability of the pillars further testifies to the builder's understanding of physical principles. Despite nearly 12 millennia of environmental change, many of the pillars remain upright and structurally sound. This suggests careful foundation preparation and an intuitive grasp of balance, weight distribution, and gravity. Although formal physics did not exist, practical knowledge accumulated through observation and experience was clearly mastered and consistently applied. When viewed within the broader historical framework, Göbekli Tepe presents a profound paradox. According to conventional models, monumental architecture emerges only after agriculture provides food surplus and social stability. Yet here, large-scale construction appears to precede agriculture itself. This has led to a revolutionary hypothesis that the need to build and maintain ritual centers like Göbekli Tepe may have encouraged long-term settlement, social coordination, and ultimately the domestication of plants and animals. If correct, architecture was not a consequence of civilization, but one of its driving forces. The mystery deepens further when considering how Göbekli Tepe came to an end. The entire complex was deliberately buried. This was not the result of natural collapse or gradual abandonment. Layers of soil, stone, and debris were intentionally placed, filling the structures while they were still intact. This deliberate burial suggests an act of consciousness, possibly ritual in nature, marking the closure of the site. Rather than allowing the monument to decay, its builders appear to have sealed it, preserving it beneath the earth, as if safeguarding its meaning from the future. Today, much of Göbekli Tepe remains unexcavated. Each newly revealed enclosure raises new questions rather than providing final answers.
the site continues to challenge assumptions about creativity, organization, and abstract thought in early human societies. Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent message from a distant past, reminding us that from the very dawn of human history, our ancestors possessed capacities far greater than we once imagined. Civilization, it suggests, may not have begun in cultivated fields, but among towering stones raised in the name of belief, ritual, and a desire to connect with forces beyond ordinary comprehension.
Çatalhöyük. Long before cities were mapped by streets, before kings ruled from palaces, and before power was immortalized in stone monuments, there existed a settlement that followed none of the expected rules. Çatalhöyük stands as one of the most unsettling challenges to modern interpretations of early human society. Not simply because it is ancient, but because it refuses to fit into the narrative we have constructed about how civilization is supposed to develop. Founded around the 9th millennium BCE, Çatalhöyük was a densely populated Neolithic settlement that housed thousands of people in an unbroken mass of interlocking homes. There were no roads, no public squares, no palaces, and no visible symbols of centralized authority. Nothing in its layout reflects the familiar trajectory toward hierarchy, domination, or formal governance. Instead, Çatalhöyük presents archaeology with a deeply uncomfortable question. How could a large, long-lasting community function and even thrive without rulers, without formal power structures, and without the architectural expressions of authority we assume are necessary for social stability? If a society could endure for centuries without hierarchy, should it be considered advanced or simply misunderstood? At Çatalhöyük, the very idea of urban space contradicts almost every modern assumption. There were no streets or alleys. Instead, the settlement formed a continuous architectural mass, with houses built wall to wall. Movement took place across flat rooftops that functioned as communal pathways. People entered their homes through openings in the ceiling, descending by ladder into the interior. The roof, not the street, defined the boundary between private life and the outside world. Equally striking is the architectural uniformity of the settlement. No building stands out as larger, more elaborate, or more authoritative than the others. There are no elite residences, no administrative centers, and no monumental temples dominating the landscape. This spatial equality strongly suggests that architecture at Çatalhöyük was not used to express power or status, but instead reflected a social order grounded in relative egalitarianism.
This apparent equality extended into the community's relationship with death. Rather than separating burial spaces from daily life, the inhabitants of Çatalhöyük buried their dead beneath the floors of their homes, directly beneath the spaces where they slept, cooked, and gathered. Over generations, families lived literally above the remains of their ancestors, as if death marked not an end, but a continued presence within the household. In some cases, skulls were later removed from the graves, modified, painted, or displayed separately. This practice suggests that the dead held an ongoing symbolic or spiritual role within the community. Rather than distancing themselves from death, the people of Çatalhöyük appear to have integrated it into everyday life in a way that remains deeply unfamiliar to modern societies. Art at Çatalhöyük further reinforces the complexity of its symbolic world. The interior walls of houses are covered with repeated imagery, dangerous animals, abstract geometric forms, and prominently rendered female figures with emphasized reproductive features. These images appear again and again across the settlement, yet they are never accompanied by writing or explanatory symbols. This silence has left researchers with persistent uncertainty. Do these images represent religious beliefs, ritual cycles, mythological narratives, or a symbolic language used to interpret the natural world. Despite decades of study, no single interpretation has been able to fully explain the meaning or function of this visual system. Perhaps most surprising of all is what Çatalhöyük lacks. Despite its size and long occupation, there is no clear evidence of warfare. Archaeologists have found no defensive walls, no fortifications, and no unmistakable weapons of organized conflict. This absence raises a difficult question. Was Çatalhöyük a largely peaceful society, or did conflict exist in forms that leave little trace in the archaeological record?
The endurance of Çatalhöyük is remarkable, but its end is even more perplexing. For centuries, the settlement maintained a stable social structure without evolving into a hierarchical state, without producing monumental architecture, and without displaying signs of political centralization. And yet, it was gradually abandoned. There is no evidence of sudden catastrophe. Archaeological layers reveal no widespread destruction, no mass burials, no signs of epidemic disease, violent conflict, or environmental disaster severe enough to force an immediate departure. Instead, the evidence points to a slow, orderly withdrawal, as if the inhabitants consciously chose to leave the place that had defined their way of life for generations. Why would a large, resilient community, well adapted to its environment, abandon its settlement without apparent crisis? Some theories point to gradual climate shifts, changes in water availability, declining soil fertility, or shifting regional exchange networks. Others emphasize population pressure or evolving economic strategies. Yet none of these explanations fully account for the calm and deliberate nature of the departure. Increasingly, scholars suggest that the disappearance of Çatalhöyük should not be understood as collapse, but as transformation. As belief systems, rituals, and social relationships changed, the physical form of the settlement may have lost its meaning. When the ideas that sustained the community evolved, the place itself may simply have become unnecessary. From this perspective, Çatalhöyük did not fail, it was completed. Its abandonment marks not an end born of crisis, but the conclusion of a social experiment unlike any other in human history. This ambiguity is precisely what makes Çatalhöyük one of the greatest mysteries of prehistory. A society that did not pursue power, did not develop into a state, did not fall through violence, and left no clear explanation for its disappearance, challenges the assumption that human history follows a single linear path. It reminds us that there were once communities that chose to exist and to disappear on their own terms, leaving behind not answers, but enduring questions.
Diyarbakır walls. Rising from the heart of southeastern Anatolia, the walls of Diyarbakır do more than encircle a city. They confront time itself. Built primarily from dense black basalt, a volcanic stone prized for its durability, these fortifications have endured nearly 2,000 years in a region shaped by war, earthquakes, and the relentless turnover of empires. Stretching for roughly 5.8 kilometers, rising in places over 10 meters high and several meters thick, the walls feel less like conventional architecture and more like a sculpted extension of the landscape itself. Their dark mass dominates the city, blurring the line between human construction and geological formation. Yet their very existence raises difficult questions. Why did ancient builders commit to one of the hardest stones available? How were multi-ton basalt blocks quarried, transported, and assembled with such precision long before modern machinery? And how have these fortifications survived when countless other cities, built of far lighter materials, have vanished entirely? The walls of Diyarbakır are not merely defensive structures, they are an unresolved question, carved in black stone.
Their construction reflects an extraordinary level of organization and engineering for the ancient world. Massive basalt blocks, each weighing several tons, were carefully extracted and positioned with remarkable accuracy. The stones were shaped to interlock tightly, often requiring little mortar, relying instead on mass, balance, and precise placement. This approach reveals a deep empirical understanding of materials, terrain, and structural behavior, knowledge developed through generations of building experience rather than written theory.
Basalt was not an easy choice. Compared to limestone or sandstone, it is significantly harder, more resistant to carving, and far more demanding on tools and labor. Selecting basalt meant slower progress and greater physical effort. Its use, therefore, appears intentional, suggesting that permanence and resilience mattered more than convenience. The builders were not constructing for a single generation, but for centuries. The black basalt itself likely carried symbolic weight. Its color absorbs light, stripping the walls of ornamentation and replacing elegance with gravity. Approaching Diyarbakır, ancient visitors would have encountered not welcoming architecture, but overwhelming mass. The walls communicated authority before a single soldier appeared. In this sense, they functioned not only as physical defenses, but as psychological ones, projecting inevitability, endurance, and power. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Diyarbakır walls is their resistance to earthquakes. The region sits within an active seismic zone and has suffered repeated destructive tremors throughout history. Yet the fortifications have rarely experienced catastrophic collapse. This resilience appears counterintuitive given their enormous weight. Modern researchers suggest that the wall's segmented design, slight curvature, and irregular stone bonding may allow subtle movement during seismic activity, dispersing energy rather than concentrating it. Whether this was intentional engineering or the result of long refined building tradition remains uncertain. Adding further complexity is the wall's layered history. Roman emperors, Byzantine rulers, Islamic dynasties, and Ottoman authorities all repaired, expanded, and modified the fortifications. Inscriptions in Latin, Greek, Syriac, and Arabic mark these phases of control. Yet beneath these additions lies an older basalt core whose precise origins remain debated. Its scale, coherence, and construction style differ subtly from later phases, hinting at foundations laid during the late Roman period, possibly incorporating even earlier elements now archaeologically obscured.
Some inscriptions appear deliberately erased or built over, not through random damage but purposeful alteration. These acts suggest changing political or religious priorities, where older identities were suppressed to legitimize new authority. The walls thus became not only military defenses, but a canvas for power, memory, and erasure. Taken together, the walls of Diyarbakır transcend their function as fortifications. They stand as a monumental dialogue between human ambition and time itself. Who first envisioned a city wrapped in stones so heavy, so enduring, and so uncompromising? What knowledge guided its builders, and why did they choose permanence over ease? Today, as these black basalt walls rise silently within a living city, they continue to challenge historians and engineers alike. They remind us that ancient societies often possessed practical knowledge equal to their needs, knowledge refined through experience, lost not through mystery, but through the simple passing of civilizations. Some answers may never fully return, and perhaps that too is part of what gives the walls of Diyarbakır their enduring power. Hattusa, the ancient capital of the Hittite Empire, was once among the most powerful political centers of the Near Eastern Bronze Age. It was a city where royal authority, religious belief, and military power were inseparably bound, forming a civilization both formidable in strength and intricate in organization.
Yet what makes Hattusa one of the most haunting places in human history is not merely its immense fortifications, its vast archives of clay tablets, or its monumental temples and palaces, but the way it came to an end. Its collapse appears sudden, quiet, and disturbingly ambiguous, as if history itself had chosen to erase it rather than record its fall. For centuries, Hattusa stood at the heart of the Hittite world. It was the seat from which international treaties were negotiated, laws were issued, and rituals were performed to preserve what the Hittites believed was the cosmic balance of the universe. Royal authority was enforced not only by armies, but by the sanction of hundreds of gods whose favor was believed to sustain the state. This was no fragile city. Built on rugged Anatolian terrain, Hattusa was carefully planned and heavily fortified, protected by massive walls, gates, granaries, temples, administrative complexes, and layered defensive systems. Everything about the city suggests it was designed to withstand war, siege, and long-term crisis. And yet, around the late 13th to early 12th century BCE, Hattusa was abandoned. This disappearance has become one of the most perplexing problems in archaeology and ancient history. Unlike cities that were clearly destroyed by conquest, Hattusa does not present consistent evidence of violent annihilation. Some burn layers exist, but they are uneven and lack the unmistakable signature of a catastrophic sack. Large sections of the city appear to have been cleared before abandonment. Some tablet archives were left behind, while the most valuable materials seem to have been deliberately removed. This pattern strongly suggests that the Hittites did not lose their capital overnight. Instead, Hattusa appears to have been abandoned through an organized or semi-organized process, an extraordinary scenario for the capital of an empire that had been one of the dominant powers of its age only decades earlier. Numerous theories have been proposed to explain this collapse, yet none alone can fully account for the evidence. For much of the 20th century, the Sea Peoples were considered the primary cause, blamed for the widespread destruction that marked the end of the Bronze Age across the eastern Mediterranean. However, when this theory is applied specifically to Hattusa, significant problems emerge. Hattusa lay deep inland, far from coastal migration routes, making it an unlikely direct target of maritime invaders. Moreover, the city shows no clear signs of prolonged siege warfare, such as systematically destroyed fortifications or widespread battle debris. If external attackers played a role, they were likely only one element within a broader sequence of destabilizing events rather than the sole cause of the capital's fall. One of the most widely supported explanations among scholars points to a prolonged climatic crisis. Late Hittite records document severe food shortages, including royal appeals for grain from neighboring regions. These texts reveal a fragile supply system under immense strain. For a centralized empire dependent on agricultural production and redistribution, prolonged drought and crop failure would have had devastating consequences. Famine did not merely weaken the population physically, it undermined faith in the king and the gods, whose primary role was believed to be the maintenance of cosmic order and prosperity. Yet famine alone may not explain everything. The Hittites had survived earlier wars and shortages. What makes this period different is that environmental stress appears to have coincided with deeper structural vulnerabilities. Internal instability within the Hittite state likely played a critical role. The empire was a complex, multi-ethnic and multilingual system held together by treaties, vassal relationships, religious legitimacy, and dynastic continuity. Royal power depended on a delicate balance between noble factions, provincial rulers, military commanders, and priesthoods. When succession disputes emerged, loyalty weakened. Administrative networks became overstretched, authority fractured. In such a system, even limited disruptions could trigger cascading failures.
Political fragmentation, economic strain, and religious doubt may have combined to erode the foundations of imperial control. What remains particularly puzzling is that despite this decline, Hattusa, the ultimate symbol of Hittite power, was not taken over by a successor dynasty or repurposed as a regional capital. It was simply left behind. Perhaps most striking of all is the way the Hittites themselves vanish from written history. While other Bronze Age civilizations collapsed yet continued in diminished forms, the Hittite Empire faded almost entirely from collective memory. After Hattusa's abandonment, no major city arose on its ruins. The site appears to have lost its political and sacred significance entirely. For centuries, Hattusa lay silent. It was not mentioned in Greek or Roman historical traditions. The name of the Hittites disappeared so completely that when modern scholars encountered it in biblical texts during the 19th century, they had no idea it referred to a former superpower of the ancient Near East. The fall of Hattusa, therefore, was not merely the collapse of a city, it was a rupture in historical memory, a rare case in which an entire empire nearly vanished from humanity's awareness. Today, most scholars agree that Hattusa did not fall for a single reason. Its abandonment was likely the result of multiple converging forces: climate stress, economic breakdown, political fragmentation, external pressure, and the erosion of the religious framework that had once unified Hittite society. Yet it is precisely the quiet nature of this collapse, the absence of a final battle, the lack of dramatic destruction, that makes Hattusa one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. It confronts us with a chilling question. Can a civilization collapse not through sudden catastrophe, but through the slow unraveling of the systems that once sustained it, until at last no one remains with the strength, authority, or belief to stay? In its long millennial silence, Hattusa seems to guard that answer for itself, continuing to challenge historians and archaeologists and our deepest assumptions about how civilizations rise, endure, and ultimately disappear.